Begin with the latest on a labor dispute that threatens to derail supply chains for Canadian businesses, industry, and agriculture. Now, this is video into us from Toronto overnight. As you can see, some of the more than 30,000 CP rail strikers are already on picket lines. At last word, negotiators were continuing with the help of a federal mediator. And we lead off with Scott Peterson this morning. He's been tracking this all day. Scott, one of the things that we were concerned about was the impact this might have on commuters.
Right.
And it looks like there hasn't been and won't be much of a problem there, but this could take a real toll on the economy.
Yeah, and a lot of unknowns at this point. When you interrupt supply disruptions, when customers are reliant on what CP ships every day, and for example, they ship 53,000 rail cars every single week. So supply disruptions, reputational issues, customers might be looking for other sources of revenue, maybe even changing countries depending on what they're receiving. And to outline sort of how big this problem is as far as the supply disruption goes, here's Dennis Darby. He's with the Canadian Manufacturers Exporters, and he talks about how much disruption there's going to be just between Canada and the U.S. as a result of this.
Most Canadian manufactured goods are part of a North American or Canada-U.S. or even an international supply chain, i.e. you're sending parts across borders, you're sending parts and coming back again. So when I talk about $100 billion a year in back and forth trade, that's parts and service, parts going back and forth across the Canada-U.S. border. So it's really important.
We're watching a lot of the grain shipments that are being held up as well. Grain farmers could get particularly hard hit. There's an estimated 400,000 tons of grain already stuck in silos, elevator silos, farmer yards. CP already has a big backlog because they had trouble this winter because it was so cold as far as shipping that grain. Spring wheat has already been planted, so this could add to the supply disruption and inventory overload as far as, you know, how long this strike is going to last. And also CN, for their part, saying there's only so much they're going to be able to do. They're not going to be able to pick up a lot of the slack on this. They have their own customers to attend to. So this could mean lots of stuff piling up at the warehouses, unable to get to the market, Heather.
Scott, back to the commuter aspect to this, I'm thinking Toronto and Montreal, the morning commute's largely finished, but Vancouver's just getting underway. A lot of people very nervous about what a labor disruption would mean to the morning commuter service.
Yeah, and those people should rest assured because a different union, that's the signal workers, 360 of them found an agreement, so they will be on the job today. And the signal workers are the ones that are in charge of those signals and in charge of the CP tracks, and that's what the GO train uses, Via Rail uses, West Coast Express, RTM in Montreal. They use those CP tracks, so commuters will be, be able to get on their transportation as usual this morning because those workers have in fact signed on with the contract with CP.
Scott, thank you very much. Right. So moving from Scott and next, considering how widespread the impact of this strike could be, you can rest assured Ottawa is paying attention. We're getting an idea this morning of what Ottawa intends to do about it, or perhaps not do for now, is more accurate. Evan Dyer is in Ottawa with more on what the Prime Minister has been saying so far.
Well, the Prime Minister, Heather, has been making it clear that he's not in a rush to jump into this labor dispute. Of course, often it does fall to governments to intervene when vital services are threatened by labor disputes, and trains are federal jurisdiction. These freight trains would be the responsibility of Ottawa. And we've seen Ottawa step in the past to resolve disputes between CP and its workers a couple of times in the past decade. Step in or threaten to step in, thereby sending the two off to arbitration. But it doesn't appear that there's a big rush for that to happen this time. Yesterday, Justin Trudeau said that there was too much of that under the former government, under the Harper government, that back-to-work legislation was a sort of a gift to employers, and it tended to encourage some employers in some sectors not to negotiate seriously, not to negotiate in good faith in the expectation that the federal government would come in and order their workers back to work anyway. He also appeared to not only implicitly criticize CP management perhaps for not negotiating as much as it should have, but to take the side of the union on one issue, not the wage dispute between the Teamsters and CP, but another aspect of the strike which has to do with rail safety, employee safety. This is an ongoing issue between the unions and CP. And he implied that if the federal government is forced to step in somewhere down the road, if this dispute drags on, it might well back up the unions in some of those demands. Let's have a look at what he said.
I can tell you we will also look at legislation to deal with some of the issues that the unions are talking about, which are not just about money, but are about safety for employees, for rail safety.
Some labor relations experts, Heather, say that the fact that the government has stepped in to sort of short-circuit strikes in the past has not necessarily helped in the long run, because issues tend to back up, they don't necessarily get resolved, and then they come back down the road. You know, in 2012, we saw the federal government intervene with back-to-work legislation in a CP strike, and some of the issues that were at stake in that strike are now coming back again. So since, as Scott mentioned, the signal workers have been able to negotiate an agreement with CP, and the rail lines are open as far as passenger trains and commuter trains are concerned, that probably also takes off some of the heat from the federal government to get involved in this dispute.
Evan, thanks very much.